He always believed that love was supposed to feel like home. The first time he saw her, it felt exactly that way, safe, warm, and certain. It wasn't one of those dramatic movie moments with flashing lights or slow music in the background. It was quiet, ordinary even. She was laughing with her friends, and something about that laugh stayed with him. It was not forced, not polished, just pure and real. That was enough for him to walk across the room and say hello. From the very beginning, their connection felt natural. Conversations flowed without effort. They could talk about everything, from silly little things to their biggest dreams. She liked late-night walks, he liked early mornings, but somehow they found a rhythm that worked for both. If she was tired, he'd bring her coffee. If he was stressed, she'd remind him to breathe. Slowly, he found himself picturing her not just in his present, but in every version of his future. His friends noticed the change in him too. He was calmer, softer, more hopeful. "She's good for you," they would say, and he knew they were right. With her, he felt complete. There were no second guesses, no doubts. Just a certainty that he had found someone worth building a life with. The small moments became the foundation of their love. The way she rested her head on his shoulder during long bus rides. The way she texted him drive safe even if he was only going down the street. The way she made fun of his favorite old songs, then secretly added them to her playlist. It was these little things that made him believe he had finally found something real. One night, as they sat under a quiet sky, she spoke about the future. She dreamed of a small house, maybe by the countryside, with enough space for a garden. She wanted laughter in the kitchen, quiet evenings on the porch, and a partner who would never give up on her. As she spoke, he listened closely, and with each word, his heart grew heavier with love. He realized he wanted to be the one to give her all of that. He didn't just love her. He wanted to marry her. It wasn't an impulsive thought. He took his time, thought about it carefully. He wanted to make sure he was ready, financially and emotionally. So he worked longer hours, saved up, and quietly searched for a ring that could reflect the depth of his feelings. It didn't have to be the most expensive ring in the world. It just had to carry the weight of his promise. He wanted her to look at it and know it came from a place of genuine love. When he finally held that small velvet box in his hand, his heart beat faster. He pictured her face, her smile, the tears that might come when he asked the question. He rehearsed the words in his mind 100 times, wanting every sentence to sound perfect. But deep down, he knew it wasn't about fancy words. It was about honesty, and his love was as honest as it could get. He kept the ring hidden, waiting for the right moment. He wanted it to be special, something they would both remember forever. A family gathering was coming up, and he thought it might be the perfect time. Both their families would be there, celebrating, laughing, and he wanted to share that moment with everyone they loved. In his mind, he pictured himself standing up, holding her hand, looking into her eyes, and asking her to be his forever. The days leading up to that event were filled with nervous excitement. Every time he looked at her, he smiled, knowing what he was about to do. She seemed happy too, though distracted at times. He brushed it off, thinking maybe she was busy or stressed about the upcoming gathering. After all, no relationship is perfect. People go through phases, and he believed love was about patience and understanding. He never doubted her. Not once. Trust came easily to him when it came to her. If she was late, he didn't question why. If she seemed distant, he believed it was temporary. He gave her the benefit of the doubt, always. Because for him, love meant faith, and he had complete faith in her. That night before the gathering, he stayed awake for hours, imagining how it would go. He pictured her surprise, the joy on her face, the applause from their families. He imagined her hugging him tightly, whispering yes into his ear, and the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. He drifted to sleep with those thoughts, clutching the ring box close to his chest, unaware of the storm waiting for him the very next day. For now, all he carried in his heart was hope. Pure, unshaken hope. The family gathering was just a day away, and his heart was racing with anticipation. He had everything planned: the moment, the words, the ring. On the surface, things seemed perfect, but deep inside, small doubts had begun to whisper. He ignored them, convincing himself it was just nerves. After all, he was about to take the biggest step of his life. But sometimes, The heart sees things long before the mind is willing to accept them. It started with little changes. She wasn't as eager to spend time together as before. Their late-night conversations had grown shorter, where once she would text him throughout the day with silly jokes or updates about her life. Now hours would pass with silence. When he asked if something was wrong, she would smile faintly and say, "I'm just tired," or "Don't worry, everything's fine," and he believed her, because he wanted to. He remembered the first time it really sank in that something felt different. They were out having dinner, one of their favorite little places where they had shared countless memories. He was excited, chatting about their future plans when he noticed she wasn't really listening. Her eyes kept drifting toward the entrance, as though waiting for someone else to walk in. When he asked what was on her mind, she brushed it off, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He wanted to believe it was just stress, maybe work or family pressures. Relationships go through ups and downs, he told himself, but the truth was, he could feel her slipping away. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet, like sand slipping through his fingers no matter how tightly he held on. Her laughter changed too. Once, it came easily when she was with him. Now, it seemed harder to find. He caught her smiling at her phone more often than at him. He never asked what was making her so happy, he trusted her too much to pry. But a small ache began to grow in his chest, one that he pushed down every time it surfaced. He told himself love required patience, and he was willing to wait out whatever was troubling her. Still, the distance between them grew. Their walks became shorter, their conversations more surface level. When he tried to bring up deep topics, like where they saw themselves in 5 years, she would change the subject or laugh it off. He convinced himself she just wasn't ready yet, and that when he proposed, all her doubts would disappear. The ring in his pocket would heal the silence between them, but deep down, he couldn't ignore the shift. She had begun dressing differently, putting in more effort even when they weren't going anywhere special. She started going out more, often saying she was meeting friends. When he offered to join, she would say, "It's just a girls' night," or "It's nothing you'd enjoy." He smiled, kissed her forehead, and told her to have fun, but each time, a small part of him wondered if she really wanted him there. What hurt him most wasn't the distance, but the absence of honesty. He would have understood if she needed space, if she was going through something personal. He just wished she would tell him. Instead, he was left guessing, filling the silence with his own fears. Despite all of this, he still loved her with everything in him. He held on to the memory of who she used to be with him, the girl who once dreamed of a small house, who laughed until her stomach hurt, who said she wanted forever. He believed she was still in there somewhere, buried beneath stress or confusion. He believed his love could reach her again. The night before the gathering, he noticed her scrolling through her phone with a smile she didn't realize he saw. It wasn't the smile she gave him anymore. He felt a sharp pang, but instead of asking questions, he went to bed quietly. He told himself tomorrow would fix everything. Tomorrow, with the ring, with his promise, she would remember why they started in the first place. But the heart doesn't lie, even when the mind does. As he drifted off to sleep, he felt an uneasiness he couldn't explain. Something in his gut told him tomorrow wouldn't go as he imagined. Still, he clung to hope. He clung to love, because that's what he had always done, believe in her. Even when she made it hard, the morning of the gathering arrived, and as he dressed carefully, placing the ring box safely in his pocket, he caught his reflection in the mirror. His eyes looked tired, worn from months of silent doubt, but beneath it was still a glimmer of hope. He whispered to himself, "This is it. Today, everything changes." He didn't realize how right he was. Everything would change, but not in the way he had dreamed. The day of the family gathering finally arrived, and he carried with him both excitement and nerves that he couldn't quite hide. It wasn't just another dinner or celebration. For him, it was supposed to be the beginning of a forever story. The velvet box tucked in his jacket pocket felt heavy, not because of its size, but because of the promise it carried. Every step he took toward that house felt like a step closer to the life he had been dreaming of. The air was warm with chatter and laughter when he arrived. Family members filled the living room, greeting each other, sharing stories, passing plates of food around. He joined in with a smile, shaking hands, hugging relatives, and offering help where he could. But inside, his mind was elsewhere. He was waiting for that one perfect moment, the right pause in the evening, when he could gather everyone's attention, hold her hand, and make the promise he had rehearsed so many times in his heart. When she entered the room, his heart leaped. She looked stunning, more beautiful than ever. Her dress shimmered under the lights, her hair carefully styled, her smile charming everyone she passed. He watched as people complimented her, as she laughed and thanked them. She had always been good at lighting up a room, and tonight was no different. He walked up to her, kissed her on the cheek, and whispered, "You look amazing." She smiled briefly, gave him a polite thank you, and then quickly moved on to chat with her cousins. That small exchange stung more than he wanted to admit. It felt distant, colder than what he was hoping for, but he told himself not to read too much into it. Tonight wasn't about overthinking, it was about believing. Throughout the evening, he kept one hand on his jacket, making sure the ring box was still there. Every time he touched it, a mix of fear and hope washed over him. He tried to find the right moment after the toast, perhaps, or maybe when the music slowed down. But as the hours passed, she seemed busier, laughing and moving around the room, barely stopping long enough to give him more than a few seconds of her attention. At one point, he gathered the courage to approach her. His heart was pounding, palms sweaty, but before he could say anything, one of her friends pulled her away to dance. He stood there, smiling weakly, telling himself it was fine. He could wait a little longer. There was still time. He returned to the dining table, sitting among relatives who were too busy with their own conversations to notice the quiet storm inside him. He sipped his drink slowly, eyes following her every move. She was dancing, twirling, her laughter ringing out across the room. For a moment, he smiled, remembering the days when that laughter belonged only to him. Then, something shifted. He noticed her partner on the dance floor, someone he didn't recognize at first. The man was close, too close. The way she leaned in, the way her hand lingered on his shoulder, it wasn't casual. It wasn't the kind of dance one shares with just anyone. His chest tightened as he watched, his breath catching in disbelief. The people around him were still chatting, still laughing, but he no longer heard a thing. All he could see was her eyes, her smile, her body language. It wasn't just a dance. It was an intimacy that told him more than words ever could. He had been blind, convincing himself that the distance between them was temporary, that love would fix it. But here it was, plain and cruel, right in front of him. His hand tightened around the velvet box in his pocket. He wanted to stand up, walk to the center of the room, and demand an explanation. He wanted to shout, to cry, to ask her why. But instead, he sat frozen, the world spinning around him. A strange calm settled over him, one born not of peace, but of finality. In that moment, clarity hit him harder than any argument ever could. This was not the woman he had imagined spending forever with. This was not the love he had been saving for, working for, dreaming for. She had already given herself away, even if she hadn't spoken it aloud. He closed his eyes for a brief second, swallowing the lump in his throat. He thought of all the late nights, the sacrifices, the trust he had placed in her. He thought of the future he had built in his mind, now crumbling like dust. And as painful as it was, he knew one truth. He could not propose to someone whose heart was no longer his. The ring in his pocket no longer felt like hope. It felt like a reminder of love misplaced, of loyalty betrayed. He loosened his grip on it, sliding his hand out of his jacket. For the rest of the evening, he stayed quiet, watching her dance and laugh, feeling like an outsider in a story he thought he was leading. No one else noticed his silence. But he knew the moment to propose had passed, and it would never come again. And though he didn't say a word that night, his heart had already made its decision. The music grew louder, filling the hall with rhythm. But for him, it sounded distant, almost muffled, as if his ears refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. She was there, in the middle of the floor, her dress swaying, her laughter carrying through the air. At first, it looked innocent, just another dance. But then he noticed the details, the way her hand rested too comfortably on the man's shoulder, the way their eyes locked for longer than strangers should, the way her smile glowed brighter for him than it had for her own partner all evening. It wasn't just a dance. It was a message, even if she never meant him to read it. From his seat at the table, he watched quietly, heart pounding in his chest. His fingers traced the edge of the ring box in his pocket, a cruel reminder of the plans he had carried into this night. That little velvet box was supposed to change everything, to secure their forever. Instead, it now felt like a weight chained to his soul. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. Every step she took with that man cut deeper than the last. She laughed at something he whispered, tilting her head in that playful way she once did with him. He remembered those moments so vividly, the nights they stayed up teasing each other, laughing until their sides ached. And now she was offering that same part of herself to someone else, right in front of him. Around him, life went on. Plates clattered, relatives cheered for the dancers, children ran around chasing each other. No one else seemed to notice the silent storm brewing inside him. To them, it was just another night of celebration. But for him, it was the night his world cracked open. His mind raced with questions. Why? When did this happen? Did I miss the signs? Was I not enough? He thought of the long days he worked, the sacrifices he made, the trust he had placed in her. He thought of the countless times he chose to believe her when she said she was just tired, just busy, just distracted. And now, watching her in someone else's arms, the answers he had been searching for became painfully clear. Still, he didn't move. He didn't shout, didn't storm across the floor. A strange calmness settled over him, the kind that comes when the truth is so obvious. It no longer needs to be spoken. He realized that if he had to fight for her loyalty, he had already lost her. She spun around, her eyes scanning the room for a brief second, and they landed on him. For the shortest moment, their gazes met. He didn't smile, didn't frown, didn't look away. He simply held her eyes, letting her see the quiet pain she had caused. She looked back at him, her expression unreadable, then quickly turned back to her dance partner as if nothing had happened. That, more than anything, told him everything he needed to know. The song went on, but to him, time had stopped. He remembered how he had planned this night in his head so carefully. The applause, the cheers, the way she would cry tears of joy as he slipped the ring on her finger. And here he was, sitting in silence, watching her give her heart away to someone else without a word. It was cruel, yes, but it was also clarifying. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive with shouting or arguments. Sometimes it walks right up to you on a crowded dance floor, dressed in laughter and betrayal. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His chest felt heavy, but there was no more confusion. The doubts, the late nights, the unanswered questions, they all made sense now. She had already left him long before tonight. All that was left was the moment he realized it. The ring in his pocket felt like it was burning a hole through his jacket. He touched it one last time, not out of hope, but out of farewell. It was no longer a symbol of love. It was a reminder of the love he had given, the loyalty he had offered, and the mistake of placing it in the wrong hands. He stayed seated until the music ended, until the dancers scattered, until she was pulled into another circle of laughter and chatter. She didn't even notice his silence, his absence of cheer. And maybe that was the biggest answer of all. He no longer mattered in her world, the way she had once mattered in his. For the first time that night, he smiled, not out of joy, but out of acceptance. Sometimes the hardest truth sets you free, and though the pain was sharp, he felt a strange strength building inside him. He had loved with everything he had, but love without loyalty was nothing more than a shadow. He knew then that he would not be proposing tonight, not tomorrow, not ever. He sat quietly, blending into the noise of the room, but inside, he had already made his decision. He would not fight for someone who had already chosen someone else. And as the music faded into the next song, he realized he was no longer holding onto hope. He was holding onto his dignity. The night carried on, full of laughter, music, and chatter, but for him, everything had turned strangely quiet. He sat there, surrounded by voices, yet it felt as though he was alone in a vast room, watching the world move without him. His eyes no longer followed her every step. They were fixed on the floor, his mind caught between disbelief and realization. He had come to the gathering with a plan, carrying the hope of a lifetime inside his pocket. Yet, that plan had been shattered without a single word spoken. It wasn't the kind of heartbreak that came with screaming or fighting. It was a quieter kind, the kind that slowly tears your heart apart, piece by piece, until you can no longer ignore the truth. As the evening went on, he found himself rehearsing conversations in his head. He thought about walking up to her, taking her hand, and asking straight out, "Is there someone else?" But another part of him already knew the answer. Asking would only invite lies, excuses, or maybe even silence. He didn't need her to explain what his heart had already witnessed. He stayed silent, sipping his drink, nodding when someone at the table spoke to him, but his mind was elsewhere. For the first time since they met, he wasn't thinking about their future. He wasn't picturing a wedding or a house by the countryside. He wasn't imagining laughter in the kitchen or children playing in the yard. Instead, he was picturing himself walking away empty-handed, but with his dignity intact. It was a thought that scared him, but at the same time, it calmed him. Love, he realized, is not just about holding on. Sometimes, love is about letting go when the other person has already left you in their heart. He leaned back in his chair, watching her from a distance. She was smiling, glowing, but that glow wasn't for him anymore. And strangely, that realization didn't break him as much as he expected. Yes, it hurt. It burned in his chest like fire. But underneath the pain was a sense of clarity, almost like a voice whispering, "This is not where your story ends, but where it changes." The ring in his pocket suddenly felt heavier than ever. He touched it again, and this time, it wasn't with hope, it was with sorrow. He had dreamed of slipping it onto her finger, of watching her eyes fill with tears of joy. Now, the thought of offering it to her felt like betraying himself. He couldn't give such a symbol of forever to someone who had already chosen to give her forever to another, instead of bitterness. What surprised him most was the calm decision forming inside. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want to cause a scene, to expose her in front of everyone. That wasn't who he was. All he wanted now was to walk away with his head high, to leave behind the wreckage of a love that had already ended without him realizing. As he sat there, his eyes fell on her younger sister, who was chatting with relatives a few seats away. She noticed his gaze and gave him a small, kind smile. Unlike her sister, she had always treated him with respect and sincerity. She had often teased them both, saying she admired their relationship. But tonight, she looked at him differently, as though she sensed something wasn't right. An idea formed in his mind, not out of romance, but out of symbolism. If the ring no longer belonged to the woman he loved, maybe it could serve as a reminder of truth. Maybe it could be given to someone who would guard it not as a promise of marriage, but as a token of dignity. For the rest of the evening, he remained composed. He spoke when spoken to, smiled when appropriate, but inside, the decision was carved in stone. He would not fight for a love that had already been betrayed. He would not waste another day waiting for her to choose him when she had clearly chosen otherwise. When the music slowed and people began to settle down, he stood up quietly. His chair scraped lightly against the floor, but no one paid much attention. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the velvet box, and walked slowly toward her sister. His heart beat heavily, but his face remained calm. Without a word, he placed the box gently in her hand. She looked up at him in shock, opening her mouth to ask a question, but he only gave her a faint smile and whispered softly, "Keep it safe." She didn't understand, but she nodded, sensing the weight of the moment. Then, without looking back at the woman he had once loved, he turned toward the door. Each step he took away from that hall felt both painful and freeing. Painful because he was leaving behind a dream, freeing because he was finally choosing himself. That night, he walked out not as a man who lost, but as a man who refused to beg for love that wasn't his anymore. He walked out quietly, but with more strength than he had ever known. And though she danced on, laughing with another man, he carried something far more important with him: his dignity, his peace, and the courage to let go. The air in the room was still filled with laughter and music, but for him, it all blurred into background noise. He had already made his decision, and there was a strange sense of calmness flowing through him now. It wasn't joy, not even close. It was the quiet acceptance that comes after a storm, when you realize the damage is done and all that's left is deciding how to move forward. He glanced around the hall one last time. Everyone seemed happy, lost in their own worlds, talking, dancing, sharing stories. She, too, was still caught up in her circle of friends, smiling, radiant as ever. If anyone else looked at her, they would see the picture of charm and confidence. But he no longer saw her the same way. Where others saw beauty, he now saw betrayal. Where others saw laughter, he saw dishonesty. The ring inside his pocket pressed against him with every breath, a cruel reminder of the dream he had carried into this evening. For weeks, it had been a symbol of love, commitment, and forever. Tonight, it had become something else, a symbol of truth, of broken promises, and of the strength to walk away. He could not give it to her. That much was clear, but he also couldn't just toss it aside like it meant nothing. The ring represented his love, his effort, his hope. It deserved to be placed somewhere, with someone who would respect its weight even if they didn't wear it. That's when his eyes once again found her younger sister. She wasn't dancing or laughing loudly like the others. She was sitting quietly near the corner, chatting politely with a few relatives, occasionally glancing toward him as if she sensed something was wrong. Over the years, he had noticed her kindness, her honesty. She was different, less concerned with appearances, more grounded in reality. She had always treated him warmly, never fake, never distant. He stood slowly, his heart pounding, not with nerves anymore, but with determination. His steps felt heavy, each one carrying the weight of everything he had lost and everything he was about to reclaim. As he walked toward her, his hand tightened around the velvet box. When he reached her, she looked up, surprised. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Her voice was genuine, full of concern. He gave a faint smile, the kind that hides both sadness and strength. Without answering her question, he extended his hand and placed the ring box into hers. She froze, looking down at the small box with wide eyes. What is this?" she whispered, confused. He leaned closer, his voice calm but firm. "Keep it safe," he said quietly. "It doesn't belong to her anymore. It belongs to someone who understands what loyalty means. You'll know what to do with it." Her mouth opened slightly, as if she wanted to ask more. But she saw the look in his eyes, tired, heavy, yet clear. So she nodded, closing her hand gently over the box. She didn't fully understand, but she knew this wasn't a moment to question. She knew it carried meaning far deeper than words. For a brief second, their eyes met. She saw the pain he was carrying, but also the strength. And he saw the compassion in hers, the quiet understanding that he desperately needed in that moment. There was no romance in it, no secret longing, only the simple truth that sometimes, when the person you trusted the most betrays you, it is someone else's honesty that helps you take the first step forward. He straightened up, his chest rising with a deep breath. Then he turned away. He didn't look back at the woman who had once been the center of his world. He didn't want to. He didn't need to. She was lost to him the moment she gave her laughter, her smile, and her trust to another man. As he walked toward the door, his mind replayed the moments they had shared, the long talks, the dreams, the promises. But instead of clinging to them, he let them go with each step. They belonged to the past now, to a chapter that had closed. The cool night air hit his face as he stepped outside. It felt sharp, almost cleansing. He inhaled deeply, letting the cold wind fill his lungs. For the first time in months, he didn't feel trapped by unanswered questions. He didn't feel weighed down by doubt. He felt free, even if freedom came wrapped in heartbreak. He walked slowly down the street, his hands in his pockets, the noise of the gathering fading behind him. He thought about the ring one last time, not with regret, but with acceptance. It wasn't wasted. It wasn't meaningless. It had served its purpose. It had reminded him of who he was, what he deserved, and what he would never settle for again. Somewhere inside that hall, her sister now held the box, probably staring at it in confusion, maybe even worry. But he trusted that she would understand one day that it wasn't a gift, nor a burden. It was a lesson, a reminder that love isn't about how big the promise is, but how loyal the heart remains. And as he walked away into the night, he realized he wasn't just leaving her behind. He was leaving behind the version of himself that accepted less than he deserved. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he would never look back. The night air greeted him with a coolness that felt both sharp and refreshing. As he stepped outside the hall, the muffled sounds of music and laughter followed him for a moment, then faded as the door closed behind him. He stood there quietly, staring at the stars above, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. He had walked away not just from the gathering, not just from the dance floor, but from a life he had once imagined down to the smallest detail. For years, he had dreamed of forever with her. He had built his days around her smile, his hopes around her words, his future around her promises. And now, with just a few steps out of that door, it was all gone. Yet, strangely, he didn't feel like a man who had lost everything. He felt like a man who had finally found his truth. The betrayal had been silent, but it had spoken louder than any argument could. It was in the way she smiled at someone else, in the way she held another man close, in the way she didn't even notice his silence all evening. Love doesn't disappear overnight, but loyalty does, and once it's gone, nothing can rebuild it. That was the truth he carried with him as he walked farther down the street. He slipped his hands into his pockets, breathing in the night air. Each step felt heavy with memories, yet lighter with every bit of distance he put between himself and that hall. He thought about the ring again, now resting in her sister's hands. Some might say it was foolish to leave it behind, but for him, it was never about the object itself. It was about what it represented. By letting it go, he was letting go of the life he had planned with her. He was setting himself free. As he walked, the memories came back like flashes: her laughter during long drives, her soft voice when she spoke about her dreams, the way she used to look at him like he was the only one in the room. He didn't push those memories away. Instead, he allowed them to pass through him. They had been real once. They had mattered once, but they no longer defined his tomorrow. For the first time in a long time, he began to think about himself, not about what she wanted, not about what would make her happy, but about what he deserved. He realized he had spent so much energy trying to be the perfect partner, always giving, always trusting, always waiting. And in doing so, he had forgotten something important. Love should never come at the cost of one's self-respect. The thought brought a small, almost invisible smile to his face. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of relief. He hadn't shouted, hadn't begged, hadn't made a scene. He had simply walked away with his dignity intact. And that, he realized, was more powerful than any words he could have spoken. The night was quiet except for the sound of his footsteps echoing against the pavement. He passed houses where lights glowed warmly behind curtains, families laughing together, couples talking softly. For a moment, he wondered if he would ever find that kind of love again. But then, he reminded himself he wasn't broken. He wasn't ruined. He was simply free to start over. In time, the pain would soften. The memories would fade. And one day, he would meet someone who valued loyalty the way he did. Someone who didn't just speak of forever but lived it. Until then, he would focus on rebuilding himself, on rediscovering the man he was before betrayal clouded his world. As he turned the corner and the hall disappeared from sight, he felt something inside him settle. This was the end of one chapter, yes, but it was also the beginning of another. He didn't know what the road ahead looked like, but he knew he would walk it with clearer eyes and a stronger heart. He paused for a moment, looking up at the night sky once more. The stars shone faintly, distant yet steady. For years, he had believed she was his guiding star. But tonight, he understood something new. Sometimes, stars fade not because they stop shining, but because you finally realize they were never meant to guide you. With that thought, he took a deep breath and kept walking, not toward her, not toward the past, but toward a tomorrow where he would carry the lesson she had unknowingly given him. That love without loyalty is nothing, and that dignity is worth more than any promise broken on a dance floor. He walked away quietly, but not defeated. He walked away not with emptiness, but with strength. And though she danced with another man behind those walls, he had done something far more powerful. He had chosen himself.